Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Page number 204. So we have just started with the order of rightening. So let's actually go through 203 and then come to 204. So page number 203, by order of rightening. With respect to the order in which the effect of karma takes place, there are four kinds of karma, namely Veti karma, death proximate karma, habitual karma, and reserve karma. The order in which the effect of karma takes place. This section concerns the order of precedence among the different karmas in taking on the role of generating rebirth linking in the next existence, right? Rebirth linking in the next existence. So that word rebirth linking is quite important, because then it denotes to us that it is an action which has fulfilled the karma patha, which has now resulted in what? A karma which is able to perform the rebirth linking function, right? Rebirth linking function. So anywhere that you would see the word rebirth linking, you should automatically now know that it is an action which has been fulfilled to the entirety of the karma patha, right? Moving on. Veti or Garuka karma is karma of such powerful moral weight that it cannot be replaced by any other karma as the determinant of rebirth, right? As a determinant of rebirth. On the wholesome side, this karma is the attainment of the jhanas. Why? Remember, because if you do have a jhana, you will absolutely gain rebirth in the respective jhana plane corresponding to that attainment, right? To that attainment. But as we also do know, there are special circumstances where a person, even with a jhana, will not gain jhanic rebirth in the respective jhanic plane. For example, the bodhisattvas, and actually even us, right? We are also, by definition, if anyone is hoping to attain nibbana through, of course, the stages of enlightenment which have been sort of, which we all know, we would all be bodhisattvas, right? Bodhisattva, the person who looks forward to the attainment of enlightenment, bodhi, right? Sattva, the person who looks forward to attaining, right? So we would all, by definition, be bodhisattvas, right? Be bodhisattvas. But when there is pure clarity on the fact of what or what we want to attain, right? Then, owing to that determination, we will not gain rebirth in those respective jhanic planes. It depends on our determination. Some would determine, yes, because we know that there is a possibility of practicing jhana, getting rebirth, or accessing rebirth through the jhanic consciousness into the jhana plane, listening and being with Dhammic persons within that jhana plane, and then furthering our enlightenment stage. If that is the determining factor, then we will gain jhanic resultant in a jhanic plane, or else we will not, right? Or else we will not. Now, moving on. On the wholesome side, this kamma is the attainment of jhanas. On the unwholesome side, it is the 5 heinous crimes together with a fixed wrong view that denies a basis of morality, right? Which denies a basis of morality. The 5 heinous crimes are parricide, matricide, the murder of an arahant, the wounding of a Buddha, and the maliciously creating a schism in the Sangha. I think last week, if I remember, we went through what a schism in the Sangha is, right? And I hope that it is now quite clear, isn't it? Is it? Right? Good. I remember when reading about the Anantaris, I asked my teacher, why is it only possible to wound the Buddha? Why can't we kill the Buddha? My teacher replied, saying, one can never kill a Buddha because the Buddha's Garuka Kamma is so powerful. Garuka Kamma, as we know, is like, the weight is the death proximate, where he sort of comes with that sort of samsaric energy that he has developed, right? With that, and also is the fruit of the first precept, or keeping to the first precept, right? Which is not killing, right? Because of that powerful karmic energy that a Buddha brings through his samsaric practice of the paramitas, a Buddha can never be killed. A Buddha can never be killed, right? Are there any questions that anyone would like to ask? No? Okay. Moving on. Yes, dear.
Just two things. See, when we determine, make a determination every time we do either a meritorious deed or more when we sit for meditation. Now we've been told that we can. Some people might want to be Buddhas or Pachaka Buddha, but most of us say that Arahanta Bodhi, that we'll have to go in a Margapala, and one day that we'll have to be Nivan through the Arahanta Marga. So if you have been constantly saying this, when you were explaining at the beginning, does it then mean that therefore, because we're always saying this, I know you explained if you are thoroughly determined and have actually attained these jhanas and then made such a powerful determination, you can be born there and then also hear the Dhamma and you can get. But generally, if you haven't progressed so far and if you kept on determining like that, then does that mean that you will never go to those Rupa Vachara and those kind of realms, because you've always been determining for Nibbana?
The fact here is still the determination. When we use the word determination, we as mundane beings would see the word in a very lax way, right? Not because we think it is lax, but compared to what is required, it is lax, right? The determination that we are speaking of, which is the determination made by a Buddha or a very committed, strong bodhisattva, there is no sway. For example, in Sri Lankan, in Sinhalese, we say ekakakulak metan, ekakakulak vena tanaka. Where we say, yes, we want this, but still, we want the other things as well. Speaking of a determination where we want exactly, what we want to come into that level, there has to be a level of samadhi. I remember my teacher used to, and I'm not speaking about a monk teacher, I'm speaking about my school teacher who used to guide me through, she, anytime that she used to do, she was a very strong practitioner, long-term practitioner. And every time that she used to, and she was a true bodhisattva as well, anytime that she would engage herself in something which was wholesome, she used to meditate, right? Anytime that she even wanted to decide, wanted to come into a decision about what was right or what was correct for the time to do, with her practice or with a meritorious deed or something, she would always make the decision after attaining samadhi, right? This this is a practice of bodhisattvas, right? Where you have complete clarity on the decisions that are made. Those decisions have much more firm standing because it arises through that sort of light of samadhi, right? Which in turn is also very powerful. We all heard the word satyakriya, right? Now a satyakriya, this sort of wish making. No, what would be a right translation of satyakriya? Satyakriya is a determination.
A determination.
Determination. Now, satyakriya is also something, people do a satyakriya, or people will be able to do a satyakriya not with a swaying mind. It is a mind that is completely committed to the subject. That is the same as actually a satyakriya comes very close to the mentality of abhinyana. Because remember, we've not gone deep into it, but we spoke of the process of, what happens with regards to a twin miracle, right? Or any other miraculous sort of action that you could do after attaining abhinyana, right? You go into the jhana, you come out of the jhana, you determine what is to be done, you go back into the jhana, you come back out of the jhana. Now you see, that is very similar to that samadhi-based satyakriya that a person would do. Right? Now, for example, the Buddha or any other arahant who had the ability of these miraculous abilities did the same thing. Now what? With the power of that samadhi. Right? So that is the same thing which comes into play when we speak about these determinations of where you want to go. Right? So it's not just, oh, I get up today in the morning, it's a beautiful day, I think I'm going to be a bodhisattva. And then, it's not something like that. It is something that is wholly backed with a wholesome mind. It is wholly something that you absolutely desire and want through the kusala of your mind and through the stability of your mind. It doesn't come just through excitement over something. When we see something nice, a nice piece of jewelry, or a new sort of electronic that is very, you're excited about it. That is not that sort of excitement based decision is not what a satyakriya or a determination in terms of this is. Okay, I hope I've answered it.
Thank you. And the second thing is, you were talking about the Buddha and the paramita. That's why you can't kill a Buddha. Is that what the Buddha was referring to when Nalagiri came and he was, fed with alcohol, and he came in front and Ananda jumped? He moved Ananda aside because he knew that if Ananda jumped, then Nalagiri would have killed him. But he knew that because he had that aspiration, and it had that.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Bhante.
But also there's something to know is the Buddha in no way has fear of death. The fear of death does not arise within a Buddha. So it's of course with metta towards Ananda, but in no way does the Buddha sort of fear death in any way as well. Yeah. All right.
Thank you, Bhante.
Noeline, yes.
Under this Garuka Kamma, it says, together with the fixed wrong view, right? And Brahmajala Sutta presents it as 62 wrong views. So what are the fixed wrong views here they're talking about?
Right. Right. Fixed wrong view is niyata mithya drishtika. Right? When a person uptakes or is convinced of a wrong view, and now this is rather fixed in that person's mind. Mind you, that people with fixed wrong views are not foolish people at all. They are actually very intelligent people, right? Because for a view to be fixed, it also means in another way, cannot be swayed. Right? So just as a Sotapanna cannot be swayed away from the enlightenment at hand, a person with a fixed wrong view again cannot be swayed. Why? Because he takes up the wrong view and checks it in sort of from different ways, niyama here, not niyama, through different ways he sort of sees how does this apply, and then all the data that he gathers afterwards, he sort of takes it in a way that contributes to that fixed wrong view, right? So what it means to have a fixed wrong view is to be niyata mithya drishtika.
So are they the ones that you said don't believe in rebirth and karma doesn't have any results and people are born by chance and not by three?
So the aspects of fixed wrong view is not believing in past births, future births, past births and future births, karma's result, four noble truths, eightfold noble path, patijassamuppada, meaning cause and effect, and the patthana. So these 9 are the facts which goes into or contributes to a person being a person who does not have a person who has fixed wrong view. Some people say, or they would sort of casually say, people who are not Buddhists have fixed wrong views. This is not true, right? This is not true. If you take people now, you take the word karma. Karma is something that is known the world over. This word karma, be it a Buddhist or be it Buddhist or not, may the person be Buddhist or not, this word karma is something which has a bit of gravity. What is karma? People know what karma is to a certain extent. People know what good and bad is to a certain extent. Even with, for example, rebirth, if you take people who are, who believe in faiths that do not sort of speak about rebirth, who say that, it is the end. Remember that even in Catholicism, there is a sort of rebirth into the heavenly realms, according to their definition of the heavenly realms. The fact of not believing in rebirth is so that where a person is born and his energy is completely, or his energy completely dies away after birth, after death, which most religions actually do not believe. Right? Now, our universe, what it says, something which is connected to the fixed wrong view, is the fact that this universe that we are in, the Mangala Chakravala, in some way, we all have an inclination of belief of these different parts and participles of, the 9 that I've mentioned. May you be Buddhist or not, in some way we have a notion which connects us to these parts. A person who has a fixed wrong view is a person who entirely removes oneself from those ideas of the universe, thus creating the foundation for themselves to be sort of, to adopt a pattern of thinking which is not in unity with the pattern of thinking or the vibration of the universe that we are in. Do you understand? That is why it is said in the Sapta Surya Ugaha Sutta and the end of the Aghanya Sutta that beings who take up these sort of wrong views, that after the demise of the world, that they will never return back to the Mangala Chakravala, getting rid of any possibility. I mean, first of all, they don't have a possibility of attaining rebirth. Now they get chucked away and can never return. Why? Not because anyone is holding them back, but only because their mental vibrations do not now connect to the vibration required in this world. Remember 2 weeks ago, I told you, if you are a Sri Lankan, there's a high chance that you will be born again as a Sri Lankan. Why is that? Because of our culture, the belief that we have in our culture. right? Because of our traditions, the belief that we have in our traditions, because of the practices, the way that we sort of synchronize with that country. That is what makes our mind is some way we might live in other parts of the world. However, there are aspects of our behavior, our personality, our being that are Sri Lankan. It is that connection that will always draw us to Sri Lanka, right? Because why? Not that anyone is controlling this, but it is for the fact that our mind resonates with that, because that is what we know, right? There are, for example, now I'm guessing that all the people in this meeting here, we don't have any or much connection. I know that Damsiri learned in Russia, but a country like Russia is something so far away from us. It is like another world to us almost. Russia is not that typical place that you would decide, oh, I need to go on a vacation. Right. So there's a very high possibility that we will not gain rebirth in Russia, maybe Damsiri, but no one else. No one else.
In fact, Bhante, we went for a holiday recently to Russia.
Oh, Damsiri, you didn't have to say that. Yes, I do remember you going on holiday to Russia. Yes, so what I mean is that world is so far away from us, and the way that we think and our behaviors and all of that, maybe even a place like China or Siberia or, these places, the vibe, the resonation, how does something resonate with us? That is what keeps us pulling, keeps us pulled down to that. In the same way, 3 classes ago, remember I told you, the only way to attain a divine rebirth is to let go of the sensual pleasures of this world. That is why often it becomes a very difficult endeavor to gain rebirth in a divine world, because divine realm, which is higher than this, because we are still caught up with the petty pleasures of this world, right? So when we are caught up in the petty pleasures of this world, there's nothing which pulls us to that world, right? But when we now, through letting go, dana, sila, and all of these things, we let go, these practices that are taught by the Buddha are those practices which excel us. But still, if we are caught to these pleasures of this world, we will always find our way to being in this world, right? So it is that resonance. So that is Noidi, near the Mithya Dushrika.
You said these people, with fixed wrong views, they are not foolish people.
Yeah.
And they always strongly believe in what they say.
Yeah.
So could they be the people like Ajita Kesa Kambali, Puran Kassapa and Makkali Gosala, those?
Well, these people were, as to my knowledge, as to what I remember, they were not Niyata Mithya Dushrika. They were Mithya Dushrika, but not Niyata Mithya Dushrika. Ne? Right? They were not Niyata Mithya Dushrika, as I remember. If I'm wrong, someone correct me. But as I remember, they were not Niyata Mithya Dushrika. And also remember the time that Venerable Sariputta and Moggallana approached their teacher, right? He knew it was correct to go and join the Buddha, but he didn't. Why? Because of his ego. Not because he thought that he knew or what he knew was correct. He knew what he knew was wrong. But he couldn't leave his disciples. What did he say? I am a teacher. How can I go under another teacher? It was wholly egoistic. These beings, these teachers knew that the Buddha was speaking of something which was, highly viable in the time, right? That is why later on, of course, the Brahmins sort of stripped parts of Dhamma from Buddhism and sort of adapted it to their own sort of doctrines. They knew, right? they were not Niyata Mithya Dushrika. Niyata Mithya Dushrikas, that is why, remember, in the Gathas we say, what do we say? Mame Bala Samagamo, Satan Samagamo, Hotu Yava Nibbana Patya, meaning let me not even come into the proximate contact with a person who is a Bala. And the Bala in its finest form is a Niyata Mithya Dushrika. Because it is said in the same Aghana Sutta, people, the Niyata Mithya Dushrikas are so good at brainwashing you with their views, because they're so entrenched in their views, and they're so passionate about their wrong views, that when you come into contact, it almost like a virus, right, spreads across your mind, because they're so passionate and so caught on the wrong views that they have now taken up. Yeah. So Noeli, no, they were not.
Okay, thank you, Bhante.
Right. All right, moving on. If someone were to develop the jhanas and later were to commit one of the heinous crimes, his good karma would be obliterated by the evil deed. Why? Because the jhanic consciousness will be destroyed by the nivarana which comes into play, and with the arising of the nivarana, the jhana will fall away, right? We know that already. And later would generate rebirth into a state of misery. For example, the Buddha's ambitious cousin Devadatta lost his psychic powers and was reborn in hell for wounding the Buddha and causing a schism in the Sangha. But if someone were first to commit one of the heinous crimes, he could not later reach a sublime or supramundane attainment, because the evil karma would create an insurmountable obstruction. Thus, King Ajatasattu, while listening to the Buddha speak the Samannapala Sutta, the discourse on the fruits of recluseship, had all the other conditions for reaching stream entry, but because he had killed his father, King Bimbisara, he could not attain the path and fruit. Remember, the Buddha, as King Ajatasattu left, the Buddha said to Ananda, Ajatasattu could have attained rebirth today, attained enlightenment today. However, because of the actions of his past, it was not possible for him, right? And he says that to Ananda as Ajatasattu leaves. Right? I mean, when we all meditate, if we've had a bad previous day or something, something has happened, something bad, something that bothers us, this keeps on popping up in our mind. Maybe you did something, maybe you experienced something. Remember, now that is something, now with Dhammic contemplation, you can get rid of that, or with time, you can get rid of that. But just imagine, when you commit a heinous crime, it appears in your dreams. It appears every moment that you close your eyes. It is such a powerful javana. It's such a powerful impulse. It corrupts the mind. Why? It basically just reminds you of your action. And this obstruction keeps you from attaining to anything, sublime or supramundane. Okay? Right. Death proximate, asanna karma, is a potent karma remembered or done shortly before death. That is, immediately prior to the last javana process, if a person of bad character remembers a good deed he has done, or performs a good deed just before dying, he may receive a fortunate rebirth. And conversely, if a good person dwells on an evil deed done earlier, or performs an evil deed just before dying, he may undergo a unhappy rebirth. For this reason, in Buddhist countries, it is customary to remind a dying person of his good deeds or to urge him to rouse good thoughts before the last moments of his life, right? Last moments of his life. When there is no Veti Kamma, the potent death proximate Kamma is performed. This Kamma will generally take on the role of generating rebirth. This does not mean that the person will escape the fruits of the other good deeds and bad deeds he has committed during the course of his life. When they meet with conditions, these karmas too will produce their due results, right? These karmas too will produce their due results, right? Is that understood? I don't think there needs to be much explanation there, isn't it? Right? Habitual karma. Now, if we think about death proximate karma, even with the pinpota, right? Even with the pinpota where you sort of remind a person about the good deeds that the person has done, but remember, the pinpota only works if you do not take it in an egotistical manner, right? Because sometimes we know, I mean, especially with the time that we live in, merits have also become rather corrupt in a way that we do it, maybe to show off the flamboyance, to show off flamboyantly how wealthy we are, or, to perform all of these things to get a favor or something. Remember that something as simple as a pinpota will also only work if you are only able to sort of do these merits with a wholesome mind. And you know what a wholesome mind is, and a wholesome mind is a part of you, right? Or else, when you're reminded of the good deeds that you do, if you think, I'm such a great person because I've done all of these things, then down you go with your greatness. Right? Down you go. So there is really no loophole. I think we all wish that there was, but actually there is no loophole of any sort. At the end of the day, it is really down to the training of the mind. It is really down to the training of the mind. Okay. Habitual or achinna kamma. Asanna, achinna. Habitual karma is a deed that one habitually performs, either good or bad, in the absence of Veti karma and death proximate karma. This type of karma generally assumes a rebirth generative function. Now, a achinna karma is usually something. Now, remember when we spoke about Yonis Manskara and Ayonis Manskara, we spoke about how when actually Yonis Manskara, Ayonis Manskara, and the Indriyas, right? We spoke about how these things sort of filter or really sort of denote how we sort of go through a mental process, or what we take out of an object that we derive through this 5 or 6 senses, right? Specifically the 5. Now, when a habitual karma would come down to that Yoniso Manskara, Ayoniso Manskara process. Because when we are performing something out of habit, right now, it could be because usually our habits are or have inclinations of unwholesome mind, because that is what habitually through samsara, if we are to sort of weigh it out, we have certain sort of tendencies of greed, hatred, and delusion, which has a more weighty side in our being through samsaric effect. However, when it comes to habitual karma, the reason that this is not something very responsible to work with is because where you can't count on it that strongly is because we don't know which habit will come up, right? Even if it is, let's say now, a person who lives a long life into their old age, lives a full sort of, goes on into their mature years, a lot of the let's say he or she has worked in a stressful environment, where he or she had to this person had to sort of really put their foot down and and sort of work in that sort of a way, right? And now they retire, of course, moves into their sort of old ages, and this is not something now with the weakening of the faculties. What often would happen is these sort of states would not just just disappear, but they would sort of settle within their more subconscious traits, because these traits were never got rid of, right? These traits were never got rid of, right? These traits were accepted wholeheartedly from the time of when you would sort of be working and all of that, that they were never got rid of, so it settles. So for example, we know so many people who have a very grumpy trait in their personality. They're very, very grumpy, and especially you see as you grow old, you seem to be more and more grumpy, right? This is where usually those akusala traits, those dosafil traits, have now settled onto their personality to a very subconscious level, right? To a very subconscious level. This is also the reason why the Buddha has said, if a person ordains an older person, if a monk is to ordain an older person, you are not to ordain an older person if you do not have the time to spend with them, right? To spend with them. So for example, now we ordained when we were quite young, right? We would be given instruction and we would be allowed to carry out those instructions throughout the monastery, right? With regards to the Buddha's Vinaya, if it is an older person, the teacher is supposed to be like a hawk, looking at each and everything with the older what this older person who has now got ordained does. Why? Not because of anything else, because this older person would come in with a lot of life experience and with a lot of thoughts and things that have really settled in their personality, which would be really, really, really hard to mend. Now, in terms, by what that means is removing their mind from the akusala traits to the kusala traits, right? That is why the Buddha says, if you do not, teachers are advised, if you do not have the time, you do not ordain, right? But nowadays, it's quite sad, it's quite sad, because now the sasana has become rather, a counting mechanism. The more that you are able to count the number of heads, it's like there are, the monastic system has in certain places turned into where you have a per head income, right? Income per head is literally taken very literally in sasana. And this is quite sad, because at the end of the day, these are young children, these are lives, right? And it is abused, right? And it is thoroughly abused. And I will not disclose, but monks that you would often respect with the greatest of piety, I would rather respect one of, bow down and respect one of you all, honestly. The fact of how they would abuse their position and claim sort of a per head income over these small younger ones, it just, I want to cry. I literally want to cry, because it has turned into, with some monasteries, it has really turned into like it's a real business. It's like trafficking in a certain way. It really is. And there's no joke about it. These kids' lives are ruined because, these psychopaths who are Buddhist monks take over these children's lives, and they treat them as an income source. I just want to cry. It is a position that we come into. So if any one of you is planning to sort of ordain kids, do your research. I would even tell you, do have a detective, look into who the monk is, because there are a lot of psychopaths out there. So, all right, moving on. So Achina Kamma. So that Achina Kamma is now sort of, is that understood? Achina Kamma, right? Good. Then Katatta Karma. In any other deed, reserve Kamma, in any other deed, not including the aforementioned 3 categories, which is potent enough to take on the role of generating rebirth, this type of karma becomes operative when there is no karma, or the other types of karma, or other 3 types of types to exercise their function. So by definition, you should understand that these are going to be, in some way, there's a high potential that it is going to be weak, right? That it is going to be weak, because there are no powerful karmas coming into to denote what you're going to be. Remember, also taking you back to now, when we talk about genetical identity, with the chromosomes and all of these structures which go into the specific identification process which happens within a being to define, to program a being's root and what the being is going to sort of develop into. The people who would often have these powerful chromosomes, these powerful sort of bodies and minds, are going to be beings, or would be beings, who have very powerful good karmas backing their existence through the rebirth linking consciousnesses. Even with regards to the elements or the different elements of the body, right? Meaning, the genetical structures and all of these things, there is more potential for weaker outputs when the karmas reduce from, of course, the powerful karmas going down to the Achinna, the Katatta karma, right? So the Buddha, for example, we know, of course, one of the most powerful beings out there. There was a lot of, with every perfection that was practiced and related onto his life, the body, the Mahapurusha Lakshana, and all of these bodily sort of components that the Buddha had, they were powerful, they were strong, they had a sway over people, communities, the world, and beyond the world. This does not just come through Katatta or Achinna. These come through very powerful, weighty karmas, right? Now, for example, even if you, now, I'm sure you all have met sort of leaders of a country, or being, or have been in the vicinity of people who are rather powerful and who have a powerful sway over people. What do they have some sort of, not an aura, but in a way of, in Sri Lanka, in Sinhalese we say Tejasa, a powerful sort of vibration to their being, right? Even if it is just their bodies, the way that they carry themselves or something. Remember that things like that, they do not come through, or they are not like in Sinhala, what we say, khana shot. They are not khana shots. These are practices that have sort of come through, right? Regardless of who they are right now, these are practices that have come through or filtered through was, right? Now, I remember there was this very powerful sort of, black magic monk that, in Sri Lanka, and he used to do all the sort of the Araksha for the president's house and, all of that, and because black magic, my mother's best friend. So I remember my mother actually asking him one day. It was during the time, the last sort of few months of the war, actually. Maybe when Nugegoda was bombed. And I remember my mother asking this sort of, powerful sort of black magic monk, why is it that, you guys can't do something to someone like Prabhakaran, like a Vaskavi or a Huniyama or something like that, and what right? And something that he said, I mean, it really did make sense, and it still does make sense, is the fact of that these people are or come into these positions of power, whether good or bad, supported by their very strong Garuka Kammas behind them. So even if one was to do some sort of what's the occult, or use occult sciences don't even affect these people, right? Occult sciences do not affect these people because of their strong vibrations of being, right? So the Garuka Kamma, which sort of appears, it is not only physical and mental, it is also vibrational. Where, for example, when the Buddha walks, people feel, right? And when some people sort of do have, not of course like the Buddha, but some people, when their presence is felt, right? I remember when every day when we were at Naoyana, and every day at 9 o'clock in the morning, we had to sort of go to sort of worship Manayaka Thero, who was Abhidhamma Nayaka Handro. When we would, and of course, there was a time where Nayaka Handro's power, it fell. It became weak, right? And inside a story is the fact that at one point, Venerable Aryananda, who is the managerial head, Naoyana Hamdaro was the spiritual head of the whole organization, but the monastery was managed by Venerable Aryananda. And I used to massage Venerable Aryananda because I'm good at massaging. And Venerable Aryananda was, he wasn't talking to me, he was talking to other people, monks, and he was like, that he is quite afraid that if Venerable Abhidhamma passes away at that moment, he is unsure about where he would end up, right? Because when someone as great, and Venerable Abhidhamma, he was great, right? I mean, no two words about it. He was a great being, but of course led a very unhealthy life because he was treated like a god, had no exercise, he was leading a very unhealthy life. And all the Ayurvedic doctors used to give him all of these kasayas and all of these sort of things. He died of it. His kidney was, his liver, and his liver, isn't it? Yes, the liver was gone. He died of it because, and I remember after cleaning, after Venerable Abhidhamma died, and I went, we went into sort of cleaning. Actually, no, after Venerable Abhidhamma sort of left the monastery because he had to go and stay at Mitrigala because it was close to the hospital. And he was still living, and we had to go clean the kuti. The basement of the kuti was a storage, and this storage had so much of prana jiva. I don't know whether you know what prana jiva is, right? It is a very thick, it's quite difficult to even swallow, but the Ayurvedic doctors used to say, take it, it's really good. And it's not the cheapest medicine as well. It was one of the most expensive medicines out there. A bottle of prana jiva was not cheap, but devotees used to bring, and so in the Ayurveda market, it would be considered something of a luxury product. And he used to take this every day, and there was enough prana jiva in that kuti to start a prana jiva shop. So much of prana jiva, and he died of it. Right. But what I'm trying to say is, that when you do not treat yourself right, however powerful the mind is, right, you just fall. Right, you just fall. And I know that there were stories about how, Buduras Viduna Kiwa, this Upastayaka monk who is another character on his own, he used to say, but really, Abhidhamma Bhante's body was really grey at the time, couple of days even before his death, because he was injected with so many medicines. I mean, he was gone long before he was gone. He was not going to come out of it, but then people made up stories and, to make him look great and all of this, which was all sort of a lot of baloney. But really, you have to take care of, this body. You really need to, you really need to take care of this body, because without it, it's very difficult to sort of maintain a clear mind. It's really difficult to maintain a clear mind. So moving on. So yes. So any questions on the katatta karma? Yes, Devika. Devika, you have to unmute yourself.
So I know it's not relevant to the katatta karma. I was wondering previously when you were talking about the achinna karma,
Yes.
and all that, about suddenly it came to my mind about these people suffering from Alzheimer's disease, whose mind doesn't work right. So what at the time of death, what type of chittas will come into their mind? I mean, because they can't think right. People with Alzheimer's, I'm just asking.
I am not completely sure about what Alzheimer's completely is, but
Yes.
what little that I understand of what Alzheimer's is, there's a lot of confusion, as I am aware. But it is not all confusion. Sometimes people pass away very peacefully because I think now the medicines that they use and the THC and all of these things that they use calms people down very much a lot. So I think, we cannot specifically say that, this is the result that these people would often get, because sometimes they are in a state of sedation sometimes, and medicines and all of these things. So yes, Achin and Katatta would have a very powerful potential when the mind is sedated to, that level, or if they're on meds. Or, sometimes I've also known people who just, yes, they have Alzheimer's and all of that, but the way that they die is sometimes not, crazy. They pass away in a very calm way as well. So we really can't say, Devika. We really can't say. We have to really take it on a case by case basis, to sort of come into a certain understanding about it, and understanding of what might have happened. But remember that even though some people might be or might die in a certain way, remember that there are sometimes people who are very strong in mind but might have strong impulsions or sort of sways towards the side of unwholesome. Right? So we cannot really say just because a person passes away very calmly that a person would sometimes, then be, sort of going into sort of heaven or something, because some people are very, very strong in mind, right? And very, very strong in mind, and sometimes they don't show emotion, right?
Yes.
They would just pass. And just because, just by the way that they pass, we do not know.
You can't determine. Yes.
You can't really say. But of course, when there is a lot of insecurity in a being, of course, then they would be, howling and crying and, all of these things, because all of these things. But so there are people who would show, there are people who would not show, but, it is not the right measure. But of course, if there's a lot of confusion, if there's a lot of sort of fear, then of course we know the place that those. Yes. A very powerful obstruction to a peaceful plus a good rebirth is fear. Where am I going to go?
Okay.
Where am I going to go? And for me personally, something that I remind myself is the words of Ajahn Chah, where he says that a pupil, a disciple, a son of the Buddha does not consider the kaya marana, right? What he considers is the entirety of death, which is the entire death of being, which is from this very life to the life that you actually end samsara. Right?
Understood. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions that anyone would have? Is it clear, the four that we have discussed? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Moving on. 205. Right? By time of ripening, with respect to the time of taking effect, there are 4 kinds of karma, namely immediately effective, subsequently effective, indefinitely effective, and defunct karma, right? Ditta Dhamma Vedaniya, or immediately effective karma, is karma which, if it is to ripen, must yield its results in the same existence in which it is performed, in which it was performed. Otherwise, if it does not meet the opportunity to ripen in the same existence, it becomes defunct, ahosi karma. According to Abhidhamma, of the 7 javanas in the javana process, the first javana moment, being the weakest of all, generates immediately effective karma. We have discussed already why the javana, the first moment, is weak and the last moment is weak, and why the middle 5 are the most powerful, right? I hope you remember. Yeah. Subsequently, effective karma is karma which, if it is to ripen, must yield results in the existence immediately following in which it is performed. Otherwise it becomes defunct, right? Ahosi. This type of karma is generated by the last javana moment in the javana process, which is the second weakest in the series, the last one, right? Because it is in the banga moment. The first one is because of not having the support of the asevana pacha, because it doesn't have the support of the asevana pacha, meaning it has to have a similar consciousness before, that respective consciousness, for that consciousness to be powerful, right? Now, then we have apara paryavedaniya karma, indefinitely effective karma, is karma which can ripen at any time from the second future existence onwards. Whenever it gains an opportunity to produce results, the karma generated by the 5 immediate javana moments of a cognitive process never becomes defunct so long as the round of rebirth continues. No one, not even a Buddha or an Arahant, is exempt from experiencing the results of indefinitely effective karma. Right? That is clear. Yes. Right. Defunct karma. This term does not designate a special class of karma, but applies to karma that was due to ripen in either the present existence or the next existence, but did not meet conditions conducive to its maturation. In the case of Arahants, all the accumulated karma from the past which was due to ripen in future life becomes defunct with the final passing away. Is that clear? Right? That is clear. Now, remember that, I mean, this is a sect of karmas. This is a group of karmas that we have often gone through. So I'm imagining that is the reason why we don't have much questions. Pushpa, yes, you have a question. Pushpa.
Bhante, why does it become defunct?
Because for a karma to give effect, it has to have conditions, right? Now let's say you have the karma to live a very successful life materialistically, right? But because of and you have the karma, you will, if you live long, if you live through, you will. But because of the lack of proper guidance during the young days, the child got into addiction and ruined their lives in a certain way where they couldn't sort of come out of it. Now they have cancer, or something became a crack addict on the road or something of that sort, let's say, right? Now, because of another karma coming into place, or because of a decision, it doesn't need to be necessarily a karma, but because a decision caused the result or caused the components which should have been there to now not be there, now it cannot give rise to a successful to do what you could have done, educate yourself, earn your, whatever you wanted to earn. Now, because of decision you made or something that you got into, it chopped off the potential for those conditions to continue into the future, right? That is, when the conditions are not there, the karma cannot give rise. If it does not give rise within that specific time, it cannot give rise in the future, right? So in a wholesome way, the arahant, who after death, all his karmas become defunct. Why? Because the conditions for its presentation or arising is now no longer active. Yeah, it's not because of any other thing like remember we discussed about hindering karmas and all of that, which comes to sort of weaken the arising of karmas. It's not anything like that. It's because the conditions are not there and the time for it to give rise have now passed, so it's defunct. It's ahos. Yeah.
In the same time, if somebody has done a wrong thing and something wrong, and will it become defunct?
What do you mean wrong thing? Meaning
If somebody has done a sin.
Okay, yes. The thing is, yes, that would be so. In the same way, for when an akusala which was to give rise, would not now give rise, because, for example, let's say people who become monks, right? They separate themselves from, of course, proper, separating themselves from, a certain sort of thing that could have happened in the future. Because of past karma, now does not give rise, because why? The components for it to give rise are no longer there, in the same way, which can be an akusala.
Yeah.
Right? These are a lot of these things with regard to ahosi karma can be changed through decisions, right? And proper awareness-based sort of approaches to life to sort of avoid. Now, for example, let's say through karma, you have a very sharp mouth. I'm speaking about myself. No wonder that came up. Right now for some reason, let us say, of course, having an opinionated opinion and voicing it can get you in lots of trouble, as we all can see. So then what happens is so then if a awareness-based decision is made to avoid such circumstances or such behaviors, that could then make the unwholesome karmas that could have given rise, could have made it ahosi, right? It could be. Yes. So Pushpa, yes, that can very much happen.
Yeah. Thank you, Bhante.
Yes. Also with regards to now something like, let's say, powerful metta, right? Powerful metta, which can also bring about different circumstances and conditions where now certain karmas are unable to give rise, because now you're living a life of, of having that sort of sense of powerful metta in your life, right? So in certain ways, there are, because of the powerful aspects of the practice or powerful aspects of changes of paths, really. You see, you were leading a a certain life, and now you sort of changed your path in such a drastically different way that those conditions now do not give way for the karmas to arise, right? It can't always happen, but there is a sway. There is a sway for sure. Okay. All right. So then we come to, shall we move on? Page number 206. The place of ripening. By place of ripening. With respect to the place in which the effect takes place, there are 4 kinds of karma. Unwholesome karma, wholesome karma pertaining to the sense sphere, wholesome karma pertaining to the fine material sphere, wholesome karma pertaining to the immaterial sphere, right? Unwholesome karma, wholesome karma pertaining to the sense sphere, wholesome karma pertaining to the fine material sphere, and wholesome karma pertaining to the immaterial sphere, right? So unwholesome karma, wholesome and unwholesome karma. First, unwholesome karma. Of them, unwholesome karma is threefold according to the dose of action, namely bodily action, verbal action, and mental action, right? And mental action. How? Killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct are bodily actions, generally occurring through door of the body known as bodily intimation, which is a bodily intimation is a part of the rupa, right? Which happens to the body. False speech, slandering, harsh speech, and frivolous talk are verbal actions, generally occurring through the door of speech known as vocal intimation, which is also another rupa, right? Which is to say through the vocal intimation. Then we have covetousness, ill will, and wrong view are mental actions generally occurring only in the mind without bodily or vocal intimation or vocal intimation, right? Now, there is an important point to be made in this regard, right? Covetousness, ill will, and wrong view are mental actions generally occurring only in the mind, important, only in the mind without bodily or vocal intimation, right? When we speak about, for example, let's, the anusayas, the representation, or the word, the proper word would be, I don't get the proper word. What we see as a manifestation of the anusaya is different from what the anusaya is, if you understand what I mean. Let's say, a kleptomaniac. A kleptomaniac is a person who steals, right? Yeah. So this kleptomania, a kleptomaniac is not all, usually they're not, it's not because they don't have it that they steal it. It gives them a sense of pleasure, to steal it. So when you're a kleptomaniac and you try to sort of bag things from people's houses and do weird things like that, it's often what the anusaya behind it is a completely different thing, right? It gives rise to a behavior such as kleptomania. Do you understand what I mean? Now, take away the anusaya word. The reasons of the mind where such a behavior has come about might be entrenched in something that happened in the past or something that happens, somewhere in your, which can be completely different and completely, sometimes you can't even link it to the act of stealing, but it's completely different, right? However, that sort of experience gives rise to this, right? Gives rise to this sort of action of kleptomania, right? The mind, what we essentially see through verbal and bodily intimation, which happens through bodily and verbal intimation, in most case scenarios, tracking back, we find very different roots causing such behaviors which we see on the surface, right? On the surface. So when we say now covetousness, ill will, and wrong view, for example, take wrong view, right? We might see, wrong view could give rise to certain actions that we might not even assume is anything to do with wrong view. Maybe we would assume it is to do with arrogance of a certain sort, or sense of high-mindedness, or a sense of, let's say, ego. But in actuality, when we track back to the mental roots of whatever action that is, it can be something completely different to what the manifestation looks like. That is where, the insight practice comes into play, where we are able to, in deeper stages and levels, we don't go into each and every bad thing that we do. That's going to be just time consuming and almost impossible. What we do is, by control of bodily and verbal intimation, through sila, through sila, good conduct, taking up positive behaviors and all of this, right? We getting rid of all those gross sort of impulses of life and behaviors. We go deeper, dwell deeper into the latent tendencies, or rather those conditions that arise within the mind, and maybe even go deeper into those to realize what they might be to a certain level. But the Buddha in the practice, if we speak about the true nature of the practice, the Buddha doesn't really talk about going deeper. He talks about the roots of the mind, but he doesn't really go into, going behind each and every akusala notion which arises, because it is far too many, right? If you were to sit down and start writing about all of the physical conditions, actually you should give your relatives to write it down. They will do a much more fantastic job at pointing out your mistakes. Maybe the husbands and the wives can exchange pens and papers, and they will give you a far more accurate, and if we were to go behind, or trying to realize each and every reason why, it's going to be madness. Absolutely frustrating. But what the Buddha says is, taking up a practice which is wholesome, which suppresses and gets rid of the blooming of those tendencies, and slowly goes and dwells even deeper through the practice, where now a reprogramming of mind essentially happens. Because if we are to track back each and everything, my gosh, it's going to be madness. Just imagine, it's going to be, and it's going to also hurt our confidence a lot, because all we might be able to see is wrong. But taking up, performing that which is good, taking up practices that are wholesome, these things do not erase, but really put us through a sense of reprogramming, where we operate, or the way that we operate itself changes, not by taking out another bolt in the system and putting a new one in, but really a transformation. Okay, so that is understandable if you do through this sort of vocal intimation, bodily intimation, and the mind, right? Where it has nothing to do with the mind, with the mind section has nothing to do with bodily and verbal intimation. Conditions which lie dormant within the mind but might give rise in different ways. These are not direct, but these work in very indirect and very sort of, sometimes very difficult to trace sort of ways. Okay, moving on. Any questions? The Venerable Buddha Rakkhita, this time his Dhamma talk is actually going to be on latent tendencies. I asked him to sort of, do something on latent tendencies for Vesak. So, so that I think it will be a very interesting talk, right? A very interesting talk. Let's see. 207. The above passage enumerates the 10 unwholesome causes of action, akusala kamma pata. As shown, 3 are bodily, 4 are verbal, and 3 are purely mental. The first 7 causes are identified with the volition initiating as an effort to accomplish the respective action. Right? To accomplish the respective action. Such volition is an unwholesome karma, regardless of whether or not it completes the action. Let's read that again, right? The above passage enumerates the 10 unwholesome causes of action. As shown, 3 are bodily, 4 are verbal, and 3 are purely mental. The first 7 causes are identified with the volition initiating the effort to accomplish the respective action. Such volition is unwholesome karma, regardless of whether or not it completes the action. We already knew this, right? Remember, I told you, even a dream is karma, right? As long as energy is created, karma is created, right? Karma is created. Okay. Then we have, okay. But if it does reach completion of the action, such volition is unwholesome karma regardless of whether or not it completes the action. But if it does reach completion of the action and achieves its aim, for example, the death of an intended victim, the appropriation of another's property, right? Then it becomes a full course of action. The characteristic of a full course of action is being a karma with the potency to take on a rebirth generating role. That is why dreams will not create a rebirth or will not perform a rebirth generating role. However, any other karma which has gone through the karma pathas and is powerful enough will perform the rebirth or can perform the rebirth generating role, right? Rebirth generating role. That is why, as mothers, as parents who have taken care of their children for 20 years, and some of you still take care of your children, in certain ways. All of these actions look at the immense potential of power in each and every one of these actions. Even today, you have cooked dinner today at home for your husband, for your wife, or for your children at home or anything. Even that action has an enormous potential if we had a bit of awareness to link it to a paramita rather than doing it just because we have to do it. These are all positive actions that can create great rebirth if done with a great mind. And the great mind being a kusala mind, selflessness. We have the ability to cultivate paramis in so much of them, powerful ones, just by sitting at home or being at home, right? All right, moving on. Generally occurring through the door of the body, kaya dwara. In relation to action, the doors are the media through which karma is performed. Right? We know this, isn't it? Right? We know this already. The door of the body is bodily intimation, kaya vinyati. A type of mind produced mental phenomenon by which a person expresses through the medium of the body. A volition arises in the mind, the expression generally occurring bahula vuttito is used because such actions as killing and stealing can also be done by speech, by command, right? You can get someone to kill. Yet, even in such cases, these actions are still considered bodily karma. These actions are still considered bodily karma, right? The door of speech, vachidwara. Is that clear? Any questions on that? Yeah? We'll come back to questions after we finish that section. The door of speech, vachidwara. Similarly, denotes vocal intimation, vachivinyati. The mind originated mental phenomenon by means of which volition is expressed verbally. Through such actions as false speech, etc., may also be done bodily by writing or by hand signals, because their main medium of execution is the door of speech. Now that gives us a different understanding of speech itself, isn't it? Right? Speech in regards to communication, right? Communication. They are still considered verbal karma, right? So what if anything that is communicated through writing, hand signals, sign language, all of that would fall under vachi karma, right? Vachi karma. Then covetousness, etc. The last three courses of action generally occur only in the mind without reaching intentional expression through body or speech. Such action is said to occur through the mind or manodvara, which here is a collective designation for consciousness in its entirety, right? For consciousness in its entirety, right? So when we say consciousness in its entirety, this also we must take into account certain aspects of, where the consciousness does not operate proper as well, right? As long as the energy is created, the karma is created. Covetousness, abhidhamma, is the mental factor of greed arisen as a wish to acquire another person's property. Even though greed arises for another's property, it does not become a full course of action unless one gives rise to the wish to take possession of that property. To take possession of that property. Unless one gives rise to the wish to take possession of that property, that fulfills the entirety of that action, right? Which is actually quite similar to when we spoke about the different ways killing and stealing can happen. I spoke of with the monastic code. I think it was last week or the week before, remember? I think it was in the Abhidhamma class maybe. Oh, this is the Abhidhamma class. Without numbers, it just sounds like a sutra class, you know. Where are the numbers? All right. So, you know, what time or what conditions needs to be fulfilled in its entirety for the action or for that to be perceived as now a complete action. Here it has a small sort of part of it there. You have to have the mind to take it, have it for yourself. That is when the abhijja is fulfilled. Then we have ill will, vyapada, is the mental fact of hatred, which becomes a full course of action when it arises with the wish that another being meets with harm and affliction. Again, is the mental fact of hatred, which becomes full course of action when it arises with the wish that another being meets with harm and affliction, right? Which can be quite, you know, which can be, we might think it might not happen much, but when we look at the news, when we hear of corrupt politicians, and when these politicians' decisions affect us, we had a very good example maybe just a year ago, you know, in America, you know, and maybe a year or two ago, I can't remember, maybe it was 2 years. Time passes so fast. You know, I mean, how many people, you know, hated, I mean, through their screens, they don't even live in America. How many people hated Trump, right? But all of this, when it comes down to the volition, now we see that these fulfill the process of, you know, of that ill will that we might muster, a vyapada that we muster, even when we are not, we might not be, of course, America does something, the whole world is affected. Yes, of course. But even, I think, just even the thought of mind, you know, how could a president be so atrocious? You know, the sort of the disbelief that a position can be abused to such an extent, you know, which creates, but in our minds, we do not see it just as that. We take it very personally, which creates a sense of vyapada, as we now have read how it happens. Wrong view, micchaditti. Micchaditti becomes a full course of action when it assumes the form of one of the morally nihilistic views which deny the validity of ethics and the retributive consequences of action. 3 such views are mentioned often in the Sutta Pitaka. Nastika Ditti, nihilism, which denies a survival of the personality in any form after death, thus negating the moral significance of deeds, which deny the survival of the personality in any form after death, thus negating the moral significance of deeds, right? Then we have the inefficacy of action view, akiriya ditti, which claims that deeds have no efficacy in producing results and thus invalidates moral distinctions, right? Which invalidates moral distinction. The efficacy of action, akiriya ditti, which claims that deeds have no efficacy in producing results and thus invalidates moral distinction, right? The acausality view, ahetuka ditti, which states that there is no cause or condition. Maybe this is a good series, actually, going through the 62 types of wrong view. Okay. Which states that there is no cause or condition for the defilement and the purification of beings. That beings are defiled and purified by chance, fate, and necessity. right? And necessity. The a-causality view, meaning in layman terms, you don't have to do it. It happens almost, in its own nature, in its own way, right? In its own way. That is what falls under the sense of Miccha Ditti, right? Miccha Ditti. Now, for example, with these three views, right? Remember that it doesn't say that these three are the only, it says these such views are mentioned often in the Pitaka. There are more, but they are only mentioning these three, right? There are more views of this sort, which gives rise to Miccha Ditti, right? Going into these Miccha Dittis can create or gives rise to then, if fully accepted, gives rise to then sort of the Niyata Mithya Drishtika Adhas, right? Or the views of that sort. All right. So it's a bit over time, right? Are there any questions that you would like to ask?
Bhante, what's the difference between ignorance and wrong view?
Noily. Noeline is getting too smart for us. Shall we just cut her out of the class, please? I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Now, ignorance and wrong view. Ignorance is much more subtle than a wrong view, right? Ignorance would further facilitate a wrong view. But a wrong view is on the basis of something or which has been taken from. Ignorance has not been taken from anywhere. It is something that is formed within you, right? Through the way that your mental manipulations and your whatever yonso and mostly ionso, mansikaras have built, that is or formulates what ignorance is. When it comes to Miccha Ditti, even if you go into the views of these three aspects that have been taught out, these are things that have been grasped from external means into the mind. Ignorance blooms from within. It is a part of us, right? It is a delusionary aspect. While now, for example, with Miccha Ditti or Ditti, there is a view, there is a thought, and there is clarity within whatever view which is. When there is ignorance, it's very difficult to point out at ignorance. Usually what we refer to or the way that we look at ignorance is through wrong view or view. We point at wrong view or view as ignorance. But really, ignorance exists at a more sort of subtle, latent, a more deeper level than wrong view ever does. It is like, for example, remember we spoke of kamma and kamma vipaka. In colloquial language, when we speak about kamma, what we often refer to, me karmyai, make a karma hinda. What is that? That is not kamma, that is karma result, right? In the same way, when it comes to ignorance and wrong view, we would see wrong view in place of ignorance, but really that ignorance aspect is of a more deeper sense than wrong view. Wrong view is taken from the world and we sort of denote it or sort of mold it out from the world, whereas ignorance is a part of our being. It's an intrinsic quality of our being, right? It's the intrinsic quality of our being. That is why that avidya, right? Avidya and tanha is the root. Remember, avidya, tanha becomes, if you just actually for just general knowledge, Google Patijasampada Mogok, right? Mogok is M-O-G-O-K, right? M-O-G-O-K, Mogok, right? Mogok Paticcasamuppada, just Google it. And on images, you will find the chart which symbolifies, or which is shown from, which shows the whole existence of the Paticcasamuppada and its meditative practice. The root of the Paticcasamuppada, the cause and effect, is Avijja and Tanha, right? Which keeps that sort of cycle running, right? Ditti is a byproduct, of course, but it is not the factor. Why? Because it is something gained. All the 62 types of wrong view are something that we adopt. Ignorance is an intrinsic quality, right? Because of ignorance, wrong view arises, not the other way around, right? Is that clear, Noeline?
Thank you, Bhante. Yeah, it's very clear.
That was actually, that was a really good question, Noeline. That was a really good question. I was quite surprised. You know, Mati, that was a really good question. Surprised and scared. Good. There is actually a lot more. There's a lot more with regard to that question. There's a lot more that we can go into, you know, but ignorance should always be seen, because even in the most basic of sense, an arahant is a person who gets rid of ignorance. No one else in the low categories. Ignorance is if we are to be asked what is the main pillar of existence, it is ignorance, right? Everything that we see, right? Even though I know that this highlight, I will use it and, you know, it will sort of finish. I mean, it is not expensive. It is not something, you know, it's just a highlighter from, you know, the handy whatever store, right? But still we find a way to cling on to this highlight in a personal aspect, something so cheap and something so easily obtainable, right? Everything in a certain way. That driving force is not ditti. That driving force, which we don't even see, is ignorance, you know, is ignorance. It is almost as the smell of air, if you understand what I mean, you know. It is something so neutral, almost. Of course, if you're not cooking anything, or, you know, it's almost something neutral, but it is there. You can't touch it, you can't feel it, but it's there. It's almost like that smell of air, you know, it's there. So we will actually go deep into it later on, but thank you, Noeline, for that. All right, so we are done with time. Pushpa, your mic is unmuted. Do you want to ask something? We are out of time, but okay.
That's all right, Bhante.
Yeah, Dil?
If you don't have time, I was thinking, so we're now talking about ditti, which is view, and we are talking of ignorance, which is avijja. So when we take the 10 fetters, you have that first fetter, which is sakkaya ditti. That's just one aspect, that is personality view. And then at the end, we have the last 10th fetter, which is avijja. So that big thing at the end, which is sort of inherent in us and which is like deep and which is within us, that's the avijja. And that first one that goes, sakkaya ditti, that's one aspect of ditti, the wrong view that you think there's you and me and mine. Am I right?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Bhante.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So if there are no other questions, let's wrap up the session for today. I'll see you on Wednesday. I mean, is there anything to say? No, nothing to say. That's it. I'll see you on Wednesday. And I hope, you know, I mean, we are almost just a week away from the 13-hour retreat. So, you know, prepare for it. You know, don't come for the retreat by not doing any meditation at home. Start doing your meditation. You know, if you're not already practicing your meditation at home regularly, start doing it. Try to, you know, prepare for it, you know, so that you get the best out of, I mean, it's such a powerful day, it's such a blessed day, it's Vesak, and we are doing this sort of retreat, and I'm trying to sort of give, you know, the best I possibly can on the day as well, but prepare for it in a way that you're mentally prepared for it, okay? So start meditating, start doing all those things that you know that you need to prepare for a retreat, right? So with that, take care, and I will see you on Wednesday. All right, Therwan Sannai.
Everyone.
Therwan Sannai.
Everyone.